I started as a student to the university. I was a product manager at the time. And it just really brought back all the joys I had in my training career. And as a result, I just worked with the manager of the university and said, let's work together.
Hello everyone, Ken here, back with another incredible interview for you. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Mike Kelly. Mike got his degree in Aeronautical Engineering, but found his passion in technical training. He spent the last 6 years in the healthcare industry working for Optum, a large analytics and technology provider owned by UnitedHealth Group. He is the principal data scientist working on machine learning projects and training United Healthcare employees on the technical and business aspects of data science and AI. He's played a major role in building the internal data science training at Optum, and in this conversation, we talk about some of the benefits and drawbacks of learning data science through your work. Now, on to the interview. Thank you for coming in. For those of you who were not just in the last 20 minutes of conversation, I forgot to press record on the first part of my conversation with Mike. So you guys are getting an even more rehearsed version of this interview. So get excited. So Mike, I wanted to bring you in. Thank you again for agreeing to chat with me. You have an awesome YouTube channel where you do a lot of really cool tutorial style stuff around data science and AI. And I think you have a very different perspective on how to go about learning this field than pretty much anyone else that I've brought on, because you've gone and you've had experience creating data science learning materials within corporations, within organizations. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that that's a really good option, or that is an option to learn data sciences after you've gotten the job. So I'm really excited to bring you in for that perspective. And I'm just really grateful to be able to have this conversation with you to share your perspective and background.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Ken. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I think it's always a good starting place to hear more about your background, how you got started in data science, how you got started learning this material, and when it was the moment that you realized, hey, this is what I'm doing as a career now, rather than just as a hobby or whatever that might be.
Well, yeah, it really kind of crept up on me throughout the years. Part of my career, actually a good part of my career, has been around enterprise data applications, which of course have a very large data backend. And so I've been involved in a small part with building those, but more so in training not only developers but end users around those large scale applications. And it was really through there that I was educated in how data operated in an enterprise environment and got exposed to a lot of relational database management. I learned SQL through those experiences. And so that's where the data part of data science entered my life. And then really the formal data science aspects started to materialize about 6 years ago when I joined on with Optum, where I am now. And I say that with the disclosure that all opinions are mine. But Optum is a large healthcare enterprise, and a number of years ago they realized that AI and machine learning was going to be the killer app of healthcare, and so it was in a large respect kind of a all hands on deck to really improve their capabilities in that area. The challenge that they faced, and maybe I'll just step back and speak in the context of all of healthcare, is that there are really two audiences that need data science training. And one of those is the recent grads and the new hires that may have a pretty good, at least in this day, wasn't so much 6 years ago, but they have a pretty good handle on what data science is and how to do data science, but they don't have the domain knowledge of healthcare, which is just an enormous domain. Every project that I start, I realize I know absolutely nothing. So it's huge learning curves in that area. And then the other audience are people that have been with the industry for many, many years and have huge domain knowledge sets, if you will, on how healthcare works, but they don't know how to build a machine learning model, or they don't know statistics or things like that. So it was really through a combination of both of those use cases that we ended up creating a university internal to the organization. So it's called, Data Science University. And the first group of people we trained were these new hires that were coming in. So it was a very formal data science and medical healthcare background type of thing. And then after that, we opened it up to the broader organization. And within about 5 years, I think it was, we trained about 1,200 employees through our, what I'll just call a nano degree at probably a master's level education, I would say, on both healthcare. I guess was healthcare data science is how you could summarize that. So that's
awesome.
That's how I got involved. I started as a student to the university. I was a product manager at the time. And it just really brought back all the joys I had in my training career. And as a result, I just worked with the manager of the university and said, let's work together. I'd love to work with you. And the rest is history. For the last 2 years, I've been working in that organization.
That's awesome. And so there's quite a few things that I really like to highlight in what you said. So the first is that, you'd been doing data, I guess, tangential work for an extended time preceding your foray into true data science. And I think a lot of people believe they have to go in and have this very structured formal education related to data science. They need to become a data scientist first, and there's no other options for breaking in. And I think it's very clear from your path that if you do something similar, right, you're a DB admin, you are a database architect, you're a software engineer, you're a data analyst, whatever that might be, there is a very clear path into becoming a data scientist from there. You have a large chunk of the skill set, and the data science skill set by nature is very lumpy, right? So I might come in, I have a stronger computer science background, but a little less on the statistics, and I have good, business skills. Like no data scientist, it's very rare that data scientists have a very even distribution of all of those skills. So when you're coming in, leverage your strengths, go into roles where you have a very strong presence. And I would imagine that your earlier data science work, or even as a PM, was very heavily focused on the data more than it was on the outcomes and the analytics. I could be wrong there, but I think that is something very important to highlight in your transition. Another thing that is really big is that, there isn't just a certificate or a master's degree route. You can get on the job training, and a lot of these trainings are really good and really relevant. If we're talking about how domain is so important, there's no better place to learn domain knowledge than from the company itself that you're working in. So, I personally prefer working at startups, working at smaller companies, but there is a definite benefit to working in one of these larger organizations that can orchestrate a more consolidated attack on teaching a subject area. So before we really jump into what creating an internal university is like, I'd personally like to understand your educational background and understand if that is even relevant to the work that you've been doing. That's one point of departure a lot of people have is, oh, I chose the wrong major in college, I'll never be a data scientist. Obviously, I don't believe that to be true. But, I'm very interested in your background, your perspective, and if that has had any impact on your career whatsoever.
I think it definitely has. And, it's no secret, just by looking at me, you can see I have the perspective of looking back some 30 years now in my career. And I think that once you start doing that, you'll always start connecting the dots of how certain things have impacted you throughout the years. I mean, I think at the very beginning, both my parents were teachers. My mom was a primary school teacher, which I think is a common term around the world. And then my father was an adjunct university instructor for many years. And so I kind of had, that perspective. Although I didn't plan on becoming a teacher or an educator or anything like that. My background is aeronautical engineering. That's what I got my degree in. But just as fate would have it, I graduated right when the Cold War ended and right when there was a huge recession at the end of the 80s going into the beginning of the 90s. And so, I didn't have a huge opportunity to get into aerospace at the time. I lived in Southern California, and that was the the Silicon Valley of aerospace back in the day, and it was that whole industry was just kind of collapsing due to the recession. So what ended up happening was I literally answered an ad in the classified ads for this company that was teaching people how to use computers, and I had been a computer nerd in high school with my Commodore 64, and really loved just tinkering with computers. And I said, well, I like computers, and it might be fun to teach people how to use them. So I answered that ad. Turned out I wasn't very good at teaching at all. There's a much longer story about me, nearly getting fired the first day that I taught, and having to really grow that skill set to where I could become an effective teacher. But I'm certainly better for it as a result of all those lessons learned. But looking back, one of the real keys of being a good teacher in any field, I think number one is empathy for the people that you're teaching, especially with adults. The adults come into a training situation in all different circumstances, not the least of which is fear. But then also just my engineering background really led to that, because as an engineer, you're taking a complex problem, you're breaking it down into its primary parts and really focusing on each of those parts and assembling them into a larger whole of a working part, so to speak. And that's what teaching is too. You take a concept like data science and you're breaking it down into much smaller parts so that people can understand what it is. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I can look back and connect a lot of dots to where I am today.
Well, I would argue that data science also follows that exact same process. And I think that's one reason why a lot of engineers find data science very interesting is you start with a problem, you have to deconstruct it, and then you have to rebuild some sort of infrastructure around how to predict it, outcomes, or understand it better, make it more explainable, whatever that might be. And, I really like your story because it has a very clear end to end, why you moved in each certain direction. So the first move into teaching might have been a little bit out of necessity, right? But it was in line with the other things that were going on with your life, in line with your parents, in line with all those things. And I think it's really important for everyone who wants to get into this field, everyone just in general, to think about their story and does it make sense? I find a lot of people saying, okay, I work in marketing, or not even marketing, let's say something completely answered. I'm a music major and I want to switch into data science. I think that it's fine, that it could make sense, but you really have to make sure that there are clear logical steps in the intermediary to get from one to the other. Combine your music with some data at a certain point, and then take another step even further in the data science direction. There has to be some logical tipping point where you're, for example, for me, I was always interested in sports, no interest in data. I learned a little bit about data and I started applying it to my athletics. And then I realized that, oh, I like this data as well, and I can move on logically to learn more about data. But the story, the narrative that you tell yourself, the narrative you tell other people, is really important for how you get from point A to point B. And if you don't have that, you're going to feel very lost very frequently, which I have absolutely experienced. So I would love to get more into what teaching data science within a corporation is like. How does one build out those programs? What are some of the important things, especially when you're dealing with those two groups, the group that doesn't have the technical per se, but that has great subject area, and the group that doesn't have the subject area, but has a lot of the technical. Are they in the same classrooms? Are they, can these people choose what courses they take to get the specific knowledge to fill out their deficiencies? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do put everyone in the same group. One of the pillars of adult learning is that the student's experience is of the highest value, even in relation to the content that you're giving. And so unlike, we have technical terms for these: pedagogy, which is, teaching children, versus andragogy, which is teaching adults. With children, they get into a classroom, they have, no say, no experience, sometimes no value in the eyes of the teacher, which is really unfortunate. And so it's basically just a sage on the stage, as we sometimes call it with them. With adults, I start every session, every semester, if you will. I've gone through the people that are going to be attending. There's usually 150 to 250 people in each session, and we've got joins into the HR database and all that, so I can see what job roles they have coming in and how long they've been with the company. And I just start off by saying, look, I'm an expert at what I'm going to teach, but I only have 6 years of that expertise. Whereas the combined expertise of everyone in this room, and I give out the number, it's typically in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 years of combined experience. So I say that, that is where the value is going to be. Each of you are going to bring something unique to the class, and it's going to add to the experience that we have.
I love that so much, because that's something that I would hope that I echo in the data science learning journey, is that even if you're coming to a company as an entry-level data scientist, an entry-level analyst, whatever that might be, you're still bringing life experience. I mean, most people are at least 20, 21, 22 years old when they're applying to these jobs. I am certain that there's something that you've experienced in your life to that point that the other person or other people in your organization have not experienced. Even though it's, a smaller sample, I've 10 or so years on that. You might have just a couple more beyond that, but there's still value that everyone can bring from their own experiences. I've seen on resume someone was a professional violinist before they had gotten this job. And to me, that ability to perform in front of other people, or that ability to understand a rehearsed action, the ability to practice and learn a very specific technique, that's something that I could 100% learn from. That's something I could take away. There's, sometimes it's hard to make those connections, but there's absolutely something that everyone can bring into those conversations and contribute to a community or to expand a perspective. So I would like to understand, from that, when you're teaching in an organization, how is that different from, perhaps a certificate or a master's program? Is it just that aspect of subject area expertise, or does it go beyond that?
There is some overlap, but the primary thing to understand is that the goal at the end is not to earn some kind of score. It's not to pass the class or get the certificate. The goal at the end of the day is to bring value to the organization. And so just learning a checklist of skills does not mean that you're, improving the business in some way. In our case, it's improving the lives of the people that we work with. So that's really the big difference, and that's where the experience of the students come in. Is how are you going to go back and apply this, or what is it about what you're learning now that you can see being able to improve your specific job. And one of the things that we do in classes is we actually require people to keep a blog of their experience during the course, and to journal or blog, if you will. What did you learn this week, and how are you going to apply this to your job as a a nurse practitioner or a program manager or a software developer or whatever it is. And, everyone's going to have a different experience in that way.
That's awesome. I think that that's one of the most important things that you can do is understand, one, how to relate what you're doing to some future outcome, but two, to track your progress. I mean, it's very easy to get frustrated when you're learning because on a day-to-day basis, it moves very slow. But if you look at things over the course of a month or a year, you'll be astounded by the progress you've made. And that's one of the biggest things about the 66 days of data initiative that I've been really pushing these days, is that you're tracking your progress every day. And after you've gone through all 66 days, you can look at how far you've come since day one, and you have this very neat log that you've shared with a ton of people. And to me, that is one of the most motivational things that you can do surrounding any type of learning, is just simply tracking it. There's this expression, I'm sure you've heard it, what gets measured gets managed. And I think that is one of the truest things I can think of. So when it comes to this type of internal learning, are there any pitfalls? Are there any drawbacks? Obviously, you've expanded on that by creating some YouTube content as well, quite a bit of it, actually. What are your thoughts related to that?
Yeah, there are a couple, and I'll just speak just generally in the industry here from what I've seen. I'd say probably in the last 3 to 5 years, because of the advance of so much online material, that there's kind of a movement towards curated training as opposed to building custom training in-house. 10, 20 years ago, everyone had their own internal training departments. I mean, even the one I was involved with, we would build all of the training in the house from A to Z. Now I'm seeing a lot of training go to, go watch, go watch the first 2 videos of this course on Coursera, and then go watch this YouTube video, and then, do the assignment on, Kaggle's chapter 3 of machine learning. And so they're seeing the I'll just say the cost savings of just using what's out there and trying to piece it together to meet their need. But the pitfall of that is that you may end up having a larger gap that needs to be filled by doing that than it would have taken for you to build some very custom and succinct training. I see that in the healthcare industry specifically. And you can just kind of, you can do the math. If I have 1,000 students and I curate a bunch of material, but they each need to spend an additional 5 hours on their own time to kind of piece it all together, that's 5,000 hours lost of productivity for the organization. Whereas I could build something very succinct to healthcare, maybe in 100 or 200 hours, and they would go away being able to apply that immediately and not have to figure out the rest on their own. Which is kind of that, I'll call it the academia model. It's not a dig on academia by any means, but that model is more, you spend 1 hour in the classroom and you spend X hours in the library figuring it out afterwards, versus the commercial model and in the professional world, I'll call it. The people are going to come to you already busy and under a lot of stress and under a lot of deadlines, and their motivation is, look, I'm going to give you an hour of my time. I expect to be 2 hours more productive afterwards as a result of it. So, those are kind of the expectations going into it.
Yeah, well, you said you weren't taking a dig at traditional education, but I personally have quite an issue with, I think, the academic approach these days. We focus so much on theory. You go to class and you're just kind of talked at for an hour, and then you're supposed to go figure out your homework at home on your own or whatever that might be. There's been quite a few studies where if me watching a lecture on my own time is just as effective as being there in the classroom. But when I go to the classroom, if we just worked on problems or the areas that I had the most issue, I would learn so much more effectively, or people in general would learn a lot more effectively. So I think that to your point, there's a lot of wasted time in a true academic setting where things that are easy to do on your own, like watching lectures, are done in a backwards order. We're watching lectures when we should be working on problems, when the teacher is there who can actually help us with the issues that we're having and getting immediate feedback rather than, having to do my whole homework and then not get it graded for another 2 weeks. And I mean, I obviously have some issues there. So,
Well, sure. And data science, comes out of the halls of academia, right? I mean,
yeah.
Specifically of the statistics departments of some of those universities. I'm sure there's a lot of really bitter statisticians out there that, are, don't have the sexy title of data scientists, but they're just saying, that's what I do. But yeah. So, and a lot of that carries into to data science training today, even in the online courses that are out there. They still follow those patterns of first principles, if you will. That you can't train a linear regression model till you've gone through statistics and linear algebra and calculus, and then we'll talk about training models. And
you have to learn gradient descent and all those things, which can be used in linear regression, but I don't think are ever really used in practice. Well, gradient descent is absolutely used in practice in like neural nets and stuff, but not in linear, regardless. So I would like to understand also a little bit better about your teaching philosophy. We've had some pretty good conversations about how you view learning, and I think your approach to that could really help a lot of people understand themselves and also how to learn this field a little bit better.
Sure. Yeah, I've kind of adopted a principle. I didn't really know what it was until it was something I'd always done, but didn't have a formal name for it. And when the world of agile software development started emerging in the early 2000s, there were some best practices and names put to these things, and I kind of came to the conclusion that, that's what I believe, so to speak. And really the main philosophy that I try and pattern my teaching after comes out of two of the folks that put together the Agile Manifesto back in the early 2000s. That's Martin Fowler and Alistair Coburn. But they talked about a method of, for them, it was how software developers learn a new skill. But I think it applies to any skills-based training, including obviously data science. And they call it the shuhari approach. That's a term that comes out of ancient Japanese martial arts. You can get the backstory on Wikipedia. I won't spend the time in our conversation going through all that, but it's basically a pattern of a learner goes through 3 phases before they master a skill. And so the first skill, which is the shu, part of shuhari, shu means to obey or follow. And as a beginning learner that has no perspective and no background on the skill that they want to learn, they basically are coming into training with the desire to just have a recipe for success. So, give me the steps that I need to follow so that if I apply those same steps to any situation that I encounter, I'll be successful. How do I load a CSV file in Python? How do I, set up a model to be trained? How do I fit versus predict a model, and so forth? So just give me the steps. It's a recipe, and we've all seen those. But that's kind of the first part of learning it. It builds their confidence and it gives them some skills that they can apply immediately. And then the second phase, the ha phase, that's basically now the translation, I think, has to do with learning from multiple masters. So you don't have one single master, speaking of martial arts, not in training, but you're basically learning from multiple sources. So this is the stage where now I can read, a Python API in the documentation, and I can query. I can formulate questions as to what I want to do, and I can find sources to get those answers, whether it's on Stack Overflow and I get a code snippet, or here's the API that does that thing, to sort a data frame or something like that, and I can understand it to the point of I can read what the parameters are, what they mean, and I can structure my code according to that. And it really is the optimization of what I learned in the first step. So now it's not just the one way of doing it that's successful, but now there's keyboard shortcuts, there's optimized training perhaps in the learning model. It's a more robust solution, or it can be generalized to other problems as well. So you're now in that step where you're much more self-guided than you were in the first step. And then the final step, the re-step, that means to leave, and that basically is where you're now just completely improvising, because you have enough building blocks that any problem that you're faced with, you can you have enough tools at your disposal that you can say, well, I'm going to use this technique that I used on this project to gather my data. I optimize the model on this other project, and I'm going to throw that in there. And, I'm now going to use this fancy API for displaying my results and so forth. So, unfortunately, a lot of people that go into training or provide training, a lot of times it's the experts in the field. And so they end up, they've been at it so long, they end up starting people out with the last phase. And it's like, if you want to learn data science, you got to learn how to read an API, or, I'm going to teach you these 10 things and you have to be able to piece them together for a new project. And it's just, it's at best discouraging, and at worst, failure inducing as far as the result of that. So that's kind of the approach that I take. It's a top-down approach to training. So in the course that I teach, and the one that I put on my channel, you're not going through 15, 20 hours of Python learning about how to type in commands on the interactive calculator commands, and then what's a variable and what's a list, and what are all the data structures, and what are all the loops, and what are all the conditional statements. And 20 hours later you train a model. Lesson one is read underscore CSV, get the data set loaded so that you can look at it. How big is it? How many columns does it have? How many rows does it have? So it's really just turning people into practitioners right away and giving them those early successes, and moving through the skills as quickly as you can. I kind of use an analog to driver's training. You go in there, and lesson one isn't how to change a tire, or how to gap your spark plugs, or how to tune your engine. It's how to turn it on, how to steer, what do the gas pedals and brake pedals do? That's kind of the approach that I'm taking. Now, all the other stuff's important, and you'll eventually need to learn it, but you don't need to learn it on day one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really like the shuhari approach. That's the first time since I read the Agile Manifesto 5 years ago that I've heard it again. But there's so much good stuff there. I think the first thing is that just going through the motions is okay. Just going through and seeing what other people have done. One of the best things I think you can do is go through Kaggle notebooks where people are practicing like real data science, and just going through and beginning to understand what they're doing. And then even doing the same project with the same methodology, obviously giving them credit, but just getting into the practice of seeing the patterns. The more we do that, the better we understand it at a fundamental level. For the ha portion, I also think it's a very similar approach where you're taking these concepts and um, you're realizing that maybe the way that you're seeing them in one place isn't the best way that resonates with you. I will look up a lot of really technical stuff. So I was looking at StyleGAN 2 for generating fake images, and looking at the documentation, I had no clue what was going on. But I watched 4 YouTube videos on it, and now I think I have a pretty good, of all from different authors, I think I have a pretty good understanding of how it works, how to implement it, whatever that might be. And sometimes it's not, a lot of people think it's them that is the problem. Oh, I can't understand that concept. But a lot of the times it's that, hey, this other resource just explains it in a way that makes a lot more sense to me. And it's so important to have diversity of thought, diversity of perspectives. I get asked so frequently, hey, what is the best online course to take? And there is no best online course. I mean, the answer is that learning is not, it's, you don't supplement one resource for another. It's all complementary. So if I learn from one resource, I can learn the same thing from another resource, but I get that additional knowledge. And it's not like one is overlapping or instead of the other. It's that you should be combining all of these things to create a bigger, I guess, massive knowledge. And I'm sorry. So learning is additive, right? It's not something that you're doing in place of another thing. We should be taking a bunch of different courses, learning from a bunch of different resources, and this is all coming together to create this bigger learning mess that you created or that I've created or whoever it might be. So I absolutely I love that concept, and it's put in a very succinct way by yourself and obviously by the founders of the Agile Manifesto. So let's change gears just a little bit here. I'd love to learn more about your YouTube channel, understand what the onus for putting your stuff out on a more public platform is. And yeah.
Yeah, I created the YouTube channel fairly recently, just a few months ago. I added the content to a channel that I had previously, and that was just kind of a selfish business decision to carry over my previous subscriber list onto the new content. But the reason I did it was multifold. One, and I think probably the primary reason, was that personally, I don't feel like I've understood something to a competency level unless I can explain it and teach it to others. So that's kind of my check as to, do I know linear regression? Well, if you've explained it in a video for 30 minutes, you've got a pretty good idea of how it works, at least to the extent that you're explaining it there. So that's part of it. And it's really, it's a portfolio for me. So, should in the future I ever need to give someone an idea of, what my experience level is, that's going to be part of my portfolio, in addition to all the other things that you've told me to follow and I'm working on as well. And then the other side of it is really just an experiment. I've gone through dozens and dozens of beginning data science courses, and we've talked about some of the frustrations around those and the differences in my philosophies. And so it's really just an experiment on whether what I think does it have legs or doesn't it? I mean, should someone start with differential calculus? Maybe they should, but I'm going to throw this content out there and see if people can relate to it. And hopefully, as it gets more and more exposure, I'll start to get different feedback and comments of what people think. Has it helped them, or is it too basic? Is it too hard, or what? I mean, I do believe that all that other hard stuff is necessary. I think data science really branches out into two different fields. One is, the Googles that are creating the TensorFlow libraries. And so, if you're on that team and you don't know how to do a partial derivative, you probably shouldn't be on that team. But, if you're working for a company that wants to do churn analysis on their sales, you can probably have some much more basic skills of just putting together a model and, optimizing that in various ways.
Awesome. I love it. I think that data science, the amount of knowledge you need should always match the problem, and so should the tools, right? And that is something that I think is is very poorly understood by both data scientists and organizations as a whole. And the more resources that are out there that can touch different levels, or you can choose your own adventure that meets the needs for you, is an incredibly powerful thing. Although it does get a little confusing with all of the bounty of resources out there. But at the very least, I think you're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and hopefully, bringing a lot more knowledge into the world. So that's really all the questions I had for you. Do you have any parting thoughts on learning data science? Do you have any advice for someone breaking into the field? Or is there, the floor is yours. You can really talk about whatever you want if you'd like.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's been great talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. One thing that I have learned just going through the 66 days of data that I've been following, one thing that's really helped me was as I go on the journey and as I learn more about what data science is, the thing that's helped me a lot has been just to put together a list of things that I want to try. I've gone through all the basics of building models and optimizing them, but just build these big lists of things that you hear about. How to dummy encode a column. Does it really matter whether your features are normally distributed for regression models? You read about all those things, but learn how to synthesize data sets so that you can practice and try all these different things out, and just build these lists of not really big grand projects, but just tasks of data science that you really think are going to help you, and that is just part of the general mastery of the field, and then just start knocking them out.
I love that. That's something I do when I start any new project. I have a lot of trouble getting started with things. And if I give myself very concrete steps of things that I want to explore, things that I should be doing with this analysis, it's a great feeling to one, check them off, but you also have a clear learning path going forward. If you read about something, you write it on your list. It's awesome to be able to say, oh, I know exactly what I should be learning next, which for most people is one of the hardest things, is the paradox of having infinite choices. Is it takes infinite time to figure out what you want to do. So the last thing I would love to share any ways that people can learn more about you, get in contact with you, whatever that might be. Obviously, there's your YouTube channel, which I'll link, but are there any other places that you'd like to be to engage with people from the broader communities?
Yeah, I'm out on LinkedIn as well under Mike D, like David Kelly. So you can grab that. I think that's linked in my about page on my channel. But yeah, we'd just love to hear from you on any of those. I'm on your Discord channel as well, so folks that are involved in that can get a hold of me. But yeah, I would love to hear from folks out in the community on how they learn, what's been effective, and anything they want to chat about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. I think this will be very useful to quite a few people, especially related to understanding how they learn.
Well, thank you, Ken. I love what you're doing on your channel as well. I think it really fills an important niche out there of, once you learn it, now what? How do you really market yourself? And I think you're doing a great job with that.
Awesome. Thank you.